Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist, and my mission is to use this space to bring content to you to help you understand your struggle with food and break free from binge eating. And today I want to talk to you about self-trust and its role in binge eating. So binge eating destroys any sense of self-trust, and we need to have some sense of trust in ourselves if we're going to get better. So we end up in a bit of a spiral with it. And so I want to look at some of the ways that we erode our self-trust. And then by looking at these, we can think about how to kind of claw some of it back. And I think it involves looking a little bit differently at this idea or this concept of self-trust. So this video was inspired by something that happened to me yesterday. I took a little bit of time for self-reflection and quietness because I hadn't for a few days. So I was feeling a bit out of sorts. I was feeling a bit disconnected from myself. So I made a bit of time to just spend some time with me. And in that time, I began reflecting, or maybe rather ruminating, on a situation that had happened over the last couple of days that I didn't like the way I had felt about it and responded to this particular situation. And I was frustrated with myself because I know better. And I was frustrated that I knew better, so why on earth didn't I do better? And then this thought came into my head, I can't even trust myself. And then that thought led to the next thought, which was and other people, people let you down sometimes, and now I can't trust other people. And with these two thoughts, there was this sort of wave of despair and this thought that, my goodness, I have to exist in a world where I cannot trust myself and I can't trust anyone else, so nothing's safe, right? This is where my catastrophic mind went. And that feeling, actually, I remember as being very similar to before a binge, as in nothing felt safe. The world felt like a bad, terrible place before I binged. I don't even know if that really makes sense, but there was a parallel for me between those two. Now, ordinarily, if I'd had this thought while I was doing things or out and about or in the middle of something, I'd have just probably not acknowledged this wave of despair I experienced, and I'd have gone off to distract myself. I'd have picked up my phone, I'd have put on the TV, I'd have done something. But because I was in that place where I had decided to pay attention, I just stayed with it a moment, feeling pretty bad. And then a question popped up into my mind. And the question was, but what is it that you don't trust yourself to do? And then the answer that responded was I thought to myself, well, to respond perfectly. And then with that response, my story and the feeling and the situation just kind of fell away because I realized what was going on. And it was that perfectionistic all or nothing thinking. I could finally spot it. I was in it for the moment, totally believing it. And then because I stayed in it, this question came up and I was like, I'm telling myself I can't trust myself because I didn't respond in the exact way I think I should have responded. That was basically it. And I think that's the same with binge eating. It's the same process playing out. So you'll say to yourself, okay, I've just binged, I feel terrible, but tomorrow I'm going to be better. Tomorrow I'm going to only eat this. Tomorrow I'm going to, all the things that you say that you're going to do with your eating tomorrow, right? And then you don't do it. Or let's say you just binged, and before that binge you told yourself you weren't going to binge, and then you binge, this idea that we respond in ways that don't seem to be helpful or healthy and seem to be going against what we know is good for us, right? So I think there's three aspects to this that erode self-trust with binge eating, but with anything really. But, let's apply it to binge eating. I'm guessing that's what you're here for. So I think the first thing that erodes self-trust is the unrealistic expectations. And that was the bit that caught me. That was the bit that pulled me out of my story, was when I realized, I'm annoyed with myself because I didn't respond in the way I expected myself to and in the way I wanted to. And this, I think, is what's happening with the binge eating. So people are frustrated because they can't go from maybe years of binging into just deciding to be different, because that's what people do when they keep trying and they get stuck in it. They keep just saying, okay, I'm just not going to do this anymore. I'm just going to be different around food. And we can't just decide to be different. Like, this has become this ingrained problem for a reason. And that expectation you have of yourself that you should be able to just try hard enough and make this stop is not realistic. So if you're saying to yourself, well, I should be eating a certain way, and let's say weight loss feels important to you, so you're thinking, I should be eating in a way that's going to cause me to lose weight. And you'll say to yourself, or you'll say to me, like, that's not an unrealistic expectation, because some people do that, right? But then we're falling into the comparison trap. And one, we don't know what some people are doing. We only see the outside of whatever it might be. And two, like, even if somebody else is able to control their food in a way that you don't seem to be able to, we're not starting from the same place, right? If you've had years or however long of conflict around food, it's going to be different from you compared to someone. And there are a few people out there who seem to just go, oh, I've noticed I've gained a couple of pounds. I'm just going to cut back a little bit. And then they cut back a little bit and the weight comes off, right? But the reason they're able to do that is because they don't have the conflict, the history, the emotional history around food. So they're not in a fight with themselves about it. You're getting in a fight with yourself and you're thinking that if I just fight hard enough, I'll find peace, you know? And I think it's just not realistic. And that can be really hard to let go of. We don't want to let go of it because we don't want it to be unrealistic. But unless we're really honest, you look at your history with food and say, is it realistic for me to be able to just change this through sheer will? If that was possible through sheer will, do you not think you would have done it by now? If this is a problem that's taken, think how much energy and time and effort and emotions this has taken in your life. Do you not think if it was a case of just willing yourself into a better place with food that you wouldn't have done it by now? So this, I think, is one part, is that we think we keep failing ourselves because we're setting this unrealistic bar. So it's not really that you can't trust yourself, it's that this expectation you have of yourself is just not realistic. And the second part, or the second thing that I think erodes self-trust, is that we disconnect from ourselves, right? So I've been feeling a bit disconnected the last few days. So had I been feeling more connected, my reaction probably would have been closer to what I would have wanted it to be. So what happened was I was feeling disconnected. I reacted in a way that I wasn't happy about. And then when I took a bit of time to myself and I kind of came back to myself, I was sort of judging myself based on how I was feeling in that moment. Because when I came back to myself, I was connected again. And I was like, oh, well, this is what I should have done, or this is how I should have felt. Notice the shoulds. But this is what I was telling myself. So I'm just sharing with you my thought process, because I think that's where we go, right? So in that moment of binging, or before the binge, there's this disconnect. Maybe the disconnect's been going on for days or weeks or months or maybe even years, right? That this disconnect needs to happen. And we do need to disconnect from ourselves in order to binge, right? It's almost impossible to stay really present and really in our bodies and still binge. In order to be able to consume the amount of food that we're capable of in one go, we have to disconnect, right? So this idea of when we disconnect, we behave in all kinds of destructive, compulsive ways. And then when we reconnect, we look at how we were behaving and we're like, oh my goodness, I failed. And we have all these judgments come up about ourselves. And this just adds to this belief that I can't be trusted. I can't be trusted around food. It's not possible for me to eat with any kind of moderation because look at all this evidence. But it's the disconnecting from the self that kind of like feeds the compulsive behaviours. That's where the compulsion comes from. And this bit sort of leads me on to the last bit that I wanted to talk about in regards to this trust. And that is that we get lost in a story. So we're always telling ourselves stories about what's going on. We're always saying, like, we like this, we don't like this, that was good, that was bad. There's this constant evaluation and this judgment going. Not to mention we fill in all the gaps. Or this person behaved like this, so that means they must be thinking this. Like, we do all this mind reading stuff and we tell ourselves this story. So when I was reacting in the way that I didn't want to be reacting the last couple of days, I was lost in a story. I was thinking, how dare this person do this? What's wrong with them? And like all these things that I was annoyed about and I was in my own petty judgments about. And so, but when I came out of it, when I reconnected with myself, when I noticed these expectations I'd been putting on myself, and when I asked that question, what is it I don't trust myself to do? This story that I was telling myself in the moment, the story in the moment was, I can't be trusted, other people can't be trusted, therefore the world is unsafe. That was my story that I was believing in that moment. And when the question came up and I questioned the story fell away. So I think with the binge eating, you have this story around your binge eating about why you do it, about what's wrong with you that you do it, all these thoughts and beliefs you have about yourself because you struggle with binge eating is part of a story. You think it's true because you believe it, but it's a story. And actually, if we want to change anything in our lives or anything about ourselves, the story has to change. Like, we can't become people who trust ourselves more if we don't challenge the story about why we don't trust ourselves, right? So this idea, like, what is your story around your binge eating? Because I think, certainly for me, like on my way out of it, my story started to change before my behaviour did. So like the binging was still going on, but I wasn't catastrophizing it in the same way. So it was like this part was changing before the behaviour changed. And actually we keep trying to change the behaviour and hoping that this part is just going to catch up. And I just don't think it works that way around for most people. So that's all I got today. Just talking about this idea, reflecting on this concept of self-trust. And so ultimately, like if you're someone who doesn't think you trust yourself, I would ask you to look at like, what are your self-expectations, Because if you feel like you keep failing them, maybe that's a chance that they are unrealistic or too high, right? And then the second bit is about like, how can you reconnect to yourself? This sounds like quite a simple concept, but if there's a lot going on in your lives, it's like, I don't have time to connect with myself. I'm a busy person. I've got stresses and I'm looking after this person, I'm looking after that person. Without making that a priority to reconnect to yourself, like, I don't know, I don't have another way through to show you. That, for me, is such an important part of it. And then the last bit is like, what is your story? What is your story about your trustworthiness? What do you tell yourself about your capacity to be consistent? And trying to challenge and question that story to really see if it's valid or not. There might be parts of it that are, but there might be quite a lot of it that isn't. And so with a new story comes a new possibility. So on that note, I'm going to leave it there for today, and I'll see you on the next video.